What's up, Meta Nerds? Welcome back to part 2 of the Resurgent-class Battlecruiser. In part 1, we talked about its size, weapons, crew, and shielding. As for its complement, the Resurgent-class Battlecruisers carried a complete wing of both the TIE-FO and the TIE-SF, making for 144 ships in total. It also had 100 atmospheric assault landers, an unknown amount of ground vehicles, and like we saw with the Imperial-class, one prefabricated ground base. These TIE fighters were delivered on racks that would bring the ships up from storage, located deeper within the Resurgent-class. There were hangar bays on the port and starboard side of the ship, but the main hangar was located on the underbelly, where a larger docking claw would aid in the landing and departing of different vessels. And most often used during full-scale invasions, there was also a flight deck located on the bow of the ship. To get this whole thing moving, the Resurgent-class was powered by one enormous hypermatter annihilation reactor. Like the many Imperial ships that came before it, the reactor was stored towards the bottom of the ship, creating this dome shape on the underbelly. There was a whole superstructure just to hold this thing in place, and an entire engineering control deck which oversaw all reactor-based activities. It's unclear if the Resurgent-class could release this reactor into space in case of an unstoppable meltdown, which was one of the cool features of the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, but we do know that it has these large reactant ducts, which are located behind the reactor containment vessel. So at least if it can't drop the entire thing out of the ship, perhaps in the case of an emergency, it can just drain the reactor into space. Either way, energy created from this reactor was used to propel the 11 engines comprising 3 larger Kuat drive yard destroyer ion engines and 8 smaller Gemini 8 ion engines. There was also a subsidiary reactor, reactant silos, and isotope containment wells, all located at the back of the ship. Together, these larger engines would provide the forward thrust. By adjusting the amount of thrust delivered by the 8 smaller engines, the pilot had much greater control over the ship. We don't have a top speed for the Resurgent, but there are reports that it could be faster than a TIE-FO if its engines were on full power and it was going in a straight line. And since the TIE-FO has more powerful engines than the original TIE fighter, the nearly 2-mile-long Resurgent-class is faster than nearly every starfighter for the Rebel Alliance or the Empire, excluding of course their interceptors. Also, this thing has the latest in hyperdrive technology, which is also located at the rear of the ship. As for its history, with the signing of the Galactic Concordance and the official end of the Empire and rise of the New Republic, forces still loyal to the Empire had to retreat into the unknown regions. Admiral Ray Sloan, Armitage Hux, and his father Brendel Hux, along with a small army of child soldiers, all followed secret coordinates to take claim of Palpatine's Star Destroyer, the Eclipse. They were able to grow the First Order over the decades following the Galactic Concordance, and were able to get former Imperial shipyards aligned with their cause, or at least their credits. Sinar Jamis Fleet Systems and Kuat and Tralla Engineering both worked together to build the First Order a new fleet that drew inspiration from the fallen Empire. They purposefully wanted them to look like Imperial ships, knowing that many in the galaxy had been conditioned to either respect or fear the look of these vehicles. But it's also said that many in the First Order surprisingly had an admiration for the Venator-class Star Destroyer, which even though it was also referred to as the Jedi Cruiser, they liked the fact that the Venator had really shown off how a capital ship could also be a great carrier, as it had over 400 starfighters on board. Combining these Republic and Imperial elements, and of course just supersizing the whole thing, they also knew their history and decided that there needed to be improvements in protecting the bridge tower. Knowing what happened to the much bigger and much more expensive Executor, the First Order didn't want to live out their own version of the Battle of Endor, and so they implemented redundancy in both the command and control systems. There was no longer this large tower that stuck up out of the body of the vessel, and both the bridge height was reduced, and there was a backup bridge located within the ship's midsection, not at all exposed to enemy fighters. If this primary bridge was to be taken out, there were already secondary personnel in place who would just take over with the ship's operations. But to keep it classic, they also retained those sunken data pits, which had been around since before the Clone Wars. We saw Armitage Hux and Kylo Ren use the Finalizer during Episode 7, which was of course a Resurgent-class Star Destroyer. And I'm sure we'll see more of this ship in the future of Star Wars. So that's it for its history. And the only behind the scenes facts that we have is that of course a Resurgent-class Star Destroyer is basically a map in Battlefront 2, and that during production of Episode 7, J.J. Abrams put forth concept art which had this new generation of battleships with an empty space in the middle of the ship, making it somewhat similar to the USS Vengeance, a vehicle created for Star Trek Into Darkness, which was also directed by J.J. Abrams. So that's it for the Resurgent-class Battlecruiser. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, and if you want to check out our social media, or ways that you can help support this channel, be sure to check out the description down below. If you want to see more, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so that you get notifications. But more important than all that, remember, at least working the bridge on a Resurgent was way safer than working in the Empire, and the Force will be with you, always.